She had nothing but her body to offer, yet the rancher still let the frozen Apache girl into the ranch. The cold night air bit sharply at the edges of the small, lonely ranch. Snow fell in thick, heavy flakes, covering the ground in a white, unbroken blanket. The wind howled through the trees and over the hills, carrying a sharp chill that seemed to reach into every bone. The rancher had been tending to his animals earlier, making sure the cattle were fed and the horses had shelter, when something unusual caught his eye. Far in the distance, near the fence that marked the edge of his property, he noticed a faint figure struggling against the snow. At first, he thought it might have been a stray animal, lost and wandering. But as he squinted through the darkness, he realized it was a person, a young woman, stumbling through the deep snow, her movements slow and uneven. She looked fragile, almost ghost-like, her small frame barely visible beneath the layers of tattered clothing she wore. The rancher's heart tightened. He had seen people in need before, but something about her made him pause. She seemed utterly alone, exhausted, and in danger of freezing to death. He mounted his horse, his boots crunching against the frozen ground, and rode closer. As he approached, he could see her face, pale, chapped from the cold, with streaks of dirt and frost on her cheeks. Her eyes were wide, filled with fear and confusion, but also a kind of desperate determination. She was trying to keep moving to stay upright, but her body was giving out. The rancher didn't hesitate. He dismounted and walked toward her, calling softly, "Hey, are you okay? Can you stand?" The girl tried to respond, but her lips were blue and her words were barely audible. Her head drooped as if the weight of the cold had pulled her down, and she collapsed into the snow with a soft thud. Panic surged through the rancher. He dropped to his knees beside her and gently lifted her small body. She was lighter than she looked, but shivering violently, her teeth chattering so hard it hurt to watch. He wrapped his coat around her and carried her toward the ranch house, feeling the sting of the wind on his face. Every step was careful. The snow was deep, and slipping could be dangerous for both of them. When he reached the porch, he carefully laid her down on a blanket he quickly spread on the wooden floor. The warmth from the fire inside the house reached her for the first time, and her body shook less as she tried to adjust to the sudden change. She curled up, almost instinctively, covering her face with her hands as if trying to shield herself from the world. The rancher knelt beside her, studying her for a moment, unsure how to help someone so clearly in need. He had always helped people when he could, but there was something different about this girl. She carried an air of fragility that demanded not just aid but patience and understanding. "Don't worry," he said gently. "You're safe now, just stay here by the fire, warm up first." For a while she didn't respond. Her breathing was shallow, her body tense, as though she expected someone to reject her or send her away. He noticed the old scars on her hands, small marks that suggested a life of hard labor or suffering. And yet, despite all that, there was a quiet strength in her posture, barely visible but real. It struck him that she had survived this long on her own, and that alone deserved respect. He went to the kitchen and prepared a warm cup of tea, adding a little honey to make it easier for her to swallow. When he returned, he sat down on the floor a short distance away and offered it to her. "Here, drink this. It'll help you warm up." Her eyes flickered toward the cup, hesitant. She reached for it slowly, her hands trembling, and took a small sip. The warmth spread through her, chasing away some of the cold, but it didn't reach the deep fear she carried inside. The rancher understood. She wasn't just freezing from the snow. She was carrying a weight much heavier than winter. Over the next hour, he helped her change into dry clothes, finding a worn but clean sweater and thick socks. She moved stiffly, clearly unused to being cared for, and her eyes darted around the room as if expecting some kind of danger at every turn. But the rancher didn't rush her. He spoke softly, telling her about the fire, the animals, the ranch, anything to distract her from the storm outside and the storm inside her mind. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to relax. By the time the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the storm had eased, leaving a quiet, snowy world outside. The girl sat near the fire, warming her hands, watching the rancher as he fed the horses. She didn't speak much, but her eyes followed him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. It was clear she had no intention of staying longer than necessary. She had survived this long by relying on herself, and the thought of depending on someone else made her uneasy. The rancher noticed her hesitation. He didn't push. He knew that trust was not something that could be demanded, only earned. Still, he couldn't help but feel a sense of protectiveness toward her. She had come to his ranch with nothing, yet there was a quiet dignity in her presence, a stubborn refusal to break even under the harshest conditions. That afternoon, as the snow melted slightly under the weak winter sun, the girl ventured outside to help feed the animals. Her movements were careful but competent, and the rancher watched with a growing admiration. She had survived in a harsh world for a reason, and her skills, though rough, were real. She didn't ask for anything beyond what was necessary, and in that, there was an honesty that the rancher valued more than words could express. By evening, the girl sat on the porch, wrapped in a thick blanket, staring at the horizon. She still said very little, but the rancher sensed that the storm inside her mind was starting to ease, just a little. He left her with a warm meal and a promise that she could stay as long as she needed. He didn't ask for payment, didn't expect anything from her. The rancher had always believed in helping people in need, but in his heart, he knew this was different. She was someone who had nothing to offer the world except herself, yet he had no doubts about letting her into his life, if only temporarily. That night she slept near the fire, finally safe from the cold and from the harshness of the world outside. The rancher sat quietly in the living room, thinking about how fragile life could be, how easily one could be lost in a storm, both outside and within. He knew that this girl, this stranger who had walked into his life on the worst night of the year, would change something in him, even if he didn't yet understand how. And she, for the first time in a long while, allowed herself to feel something she had thought lost forever: safety. It wasn't warmth alone that did it. It was the quiet understanding that someone had chosen to care for her, not because she had something to give, but simply because she was human. The rancher didn't know her story yet, didn't know why she had come this far or what she had left behind. But as he watched the firelight dance across her face, he realized that sometimes survival was not just about skill or strength. It was about finding someone willing to believe in you when the world had stopped believing. Outside, the snow continued to fall lightly, covering the ranch in a blanket of white, silent and still. Inside, a small, fragile life was beginning to mend, piece by piece, in the quiet presence of another human being who had chosen to care without question. And though neither of them knew what the coming days would bring, both could feel, in their own way, that this night had changed everything. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains, painting the small ranch house with a pale, golden light. Outside, the snow had begun to soften, revealing patches of brown earth and dry grass beneath. The rancher was already awake, moving quietly through the house so as not to disturb the girl. She had been sleeping by the fire all night, her small body curled beneath a thick blanket. For the first time in many nights, her breathing was even, calm, as if the warmth and safety of the ranch had finally begun to soothe the storm inside her. He stepped into the kitchen and began preparing breakfast. The aroma of fresh coffee, eggs, and toasted bread filled the room, cutting through the cold memory of the snowstorm outside. He could hear her stirring from the other room, the soft sound of movement signaling that she was awake. When she entered the kitchen, her eyes were still wide and cautious, her hands wrapped around herself as if she were still unsure whether she belonged here. "Good morning," he said gently, keeping his voice low and calm. "Eat something. You need strength after last night." She hesitated but slowly sat at the small wooden table. He placed a plate of food in front of her, simple but warm and nourishing. She picked at it carefully, her fingers trembling slightly as she took her first bite. For a moment, she didn't speak, and the silence between them was comfortable rather than uncomfortable. He respected that. He had learned long ago that people like her often needed time to adjust, to trust that kindness could be given without strings attached. As she ate, she finally looked up at him. Why are you helping me?" she asked softly, her voice quiet and wary. He paused, considering his words. "Because you needed it, that's enough reason. No one should have to face a storm like last night alone." Her eyes searched his face, trying to find something hidden, some trick or condition, but there was none. The rancher's gaze was steady, calm, and honest. She nodded slowly, almost as if confirming that someone could, indeed, be kind without asking for anything in return. After breakfast, he suggested she warm herself by the fire while he tended to the animals. She agreed but moved cautiously, her eyes constantly scanning the room. She wasn't used to being in a place where she wasn't constantly on guard. The rancher noticed her tension and chose to give her space, keeping his distance while working, but always close enough that she would feel safe. Hours passed, and gradually, small fragments of conversation began to form between them. She told him she was Apache, though she didn't go into detail about why she had been out in the storm. The rancher didn't press. Some things, he knew, people only shared when they were ready. Instead, he told her about the ranch, about the animals, and about the routines that shaped each day. He spoke in a calm, matter-of-fact way, the kind of voice that made people feel anchored even when they were unsure of their surroundings. She listened, sometimes asking questions about the animals or the land, and sometimes simply watching the rancher work. There was a curiosity in her eyes, a desire to understand this quiet life that seemed so far removed from the struggles she had faced. The rancher noticed it and found himself admiring her resilience. Even in the face of exhaustion and fear, she remained alert, observant, and willing to learn. By midday, the snow had melted enough that the girl could step outside safely. The rancher suggested they check on the animals together. She followed him into the cold air, her breath forming small clouds that disappeared quickly in the sunlight. She moved cautiously, as if the world outside were still unfamiliar and unpredictable. But as they approached the horses, she relaxed slightly. The animals were calm and gentle, sensing her quiet presence and not reacting with fear. "Do you ride?" the rancher asked, noticing the way she reached out to stroke one of the horses. I used to," she admitted, her voice almost a whisper. There was a hesitation in her tone, a distance that hinted at a past filled with hard lessons. He nodded, understanding without judgment. "Good. Horses can teach you a lot about patience. They notice everything, how you move, how you think. You have to be steady and calm." She nodded slowly, absorbing the words. For the first time in a long while, she felt the faintest sense of belonging. Not just as someone in need, but as someone capable of contributing, even if only in small ways. As the day continued, the rancher showed her how to feed the animals, clean their stalls, and make sure the water didn't freeze in the troughs. She moved carefully at first, uncertain, but gradually her confidence grew. There was a rhythm to the work, a predictability that comforted her. Each small task completed brought a quiet satisfaction, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Around midday, the rancher suggested she take a break inside. He had prepared a warm stew, thick and hearty, and he invited her to sit at the table. She hesitated briefly but then accepted, settling into the chair with a blanket around her shoulders. The warmth of the food and the fire began to reach deeper, melting away more of the tension she had carried for so long. "You don't have to leave," the rancher said gently, noticing her guarded expression. "Stay as long as you want. You're safe here." She looked down at her hands, twisting them nervously. I don't want to be a burden," she whispered. Her voice carried years of fear and self-doubt, the kind that comes from surviving on the margins of a world that often refuses to see you as human. "You're not a burden," he said firmly. "Everyone deserves help when they need it, and sometimes we all need someone to see us just as we are." For a moment, she said nothing. Then slowly, she lifted her eyes and met his gaze. There was something unspoken there, a fragile trust beginning to form, though she didn't fully understand it yet. The rancher gave her a small, encouraging smile, and she allowed herself to relax slightly. The afternoon passed in quiet work and conversation. She helped feed the chickens and collect eggs, learning the rhythms of ranch life. With each task, her confidence grew a little more. She began to realize that this place, this simple life, offered something she hadn't had for a long time: stability. Not wealth or comfort, not luxury or ease, but the certainty that she could wake up tomorrow and have food, shelter, and a place where she belonged, even if just temporarily. By evening, the rancher had started a small fire outside, where they could sit and watch the sun sink behind the distant hills. The girl wrapped herself in a blanket and sat quietly beside him. For a while, neither spoke, content to simply watch the fading light. The cold had not entirely left the air, but it felt less sharp than the night before. The snow had softened, and with it, the sharp edges of fear in her mind seemed to dull. "You stayed through the storm," he said finally, breaking the silence. "That takes more strength than most people have," she shrugged, trying to hide her embarrassment. I didn't know where else to go." "That's enough," he said simply. "You came here, that means something. It means you're still trying even when it's hard." For the first time that day, she allowed herself a small, tentative smile. It wasn't much, but it felt like a beginning. A beginning of something she had thought impossible: to trust someone, even just a little, and to see that survival could come without fear or compromise. As night fell, they went inside. The girl curled up near the fire again, feeling the warmth seep into her bones. She was quiet, thoughtful, reflecting on the day. She had been scared, exhausted, and alone when she arrived. Now she felt something she hadn't in a long time: the faint stirrings of hope. Not a promise of happiness, not a guarantee that life would be easy, but a simple, human certainty that someone had chosen to see her, to care for her, and to offer her a place in the world, even when she had nothing to give. The rancher watched her sleep, thinking about the fragility of life and the quiet strength of those who had been forced to endure so much. He knew she had a long road ahead, and that the world outside was not always kind. But he also knew that sometimes, a single act of kindness could change everything. And as the fire crackled and the night stretched on, he felt a quiet hope that this young woman, this stranger who had walked into his life, might finally find a place where she could rest, heal, and perhaps, one day, belong. Outside, the snow glimmered under the moonlight, silent and still. Inside, a small, fragile life had begun to awaken, not just to warmth, but to trust, to the possibility of connection, and to the understanding that being seen and cared for did not always come at a price. And though neither of them knew what the future held, they could both feel, in their own way, that the events of this day had changed everything. The days after the snowstorm passed quietly, but each one carried its own small lessons. The girl had begun to settle into a routine, waking with the sun, helping with chores, and returning to the warmth of the fire in the evenings. Despite her growing comfort, she remained cautious, always aware of her surroundings, always aware of the world beyond the ranch. She had lived most of her life on the move, constantly surviving, and it was difficult for her to believe that a place could exist where she didn't have to fight at every moment. The rancher noticed her quiet observation. He could tell she was analyzing everything: the land, the animals, his words, his actions. She had learned to read people and situations quickly, a skill born of necessity. Yet he also noticed something else: the moments when her guard slipped. When she laughed at the clumsy antics of the young calves, or when she marveled at the way sunlight touched the hills. She revealed a small part of herself that had been buried for a long time. One morning, as the rancher mended a fence near the pasture, the girl approached him slowly. "I think I can help," she said, her voice quiet but determined. She held a worn rope in her hands, the kind used for tying gates or small animals. Her eyes searched his for approval, and he nodded, encouraging her to try. She worked carefully, looping the rope and tying knots the way he had shown her. At first, her hands trembled with the unfamiliarity of the task, but soon she found a rhythm. The rancher watched silently, impressed by her patience and quick learning. "You're doing fine," he said, his voice steady. "Just remember to take your time." As she worked, she spoke a little about herself. She told him about growing up with her family, the small Apache community where she had learned to hunt and gather, and the hard lessons life had taught her about trust and independence. She spoke cautiously, leaving out details that were too painful, but even those fragments painted a picture of resilience. The rancher listened, never interrupting, never judging. He knew that listening itself could be a gift, that allowing someone to be heard was sometimes the first step toward healing. The afternoon sun grew warmer, melting the remaining patches of snow, and they took a break by the small creek behind the barn. The girl sat on a rock, letting the water run over her fingers, fascinated by the simple motion of the stream. "It's peaceful," she said softly, almost to herself. The rancher smiled. "It is. That's why I love this place. Out here things move slowly and you can see them clearly. There's time to think, to breathe." She nodded, staring at the flowing water. For a long moment neither spoke. Then hesitantly she asked, "Do you ever get lonely out here?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "But loneliness isn't always bad. It teaches you who you are, what matters, and it makes the quiet moments feel richer." She thought about that, turning it over in her mind. In her life so far, she had known constant motion, constant survival. She had rarely had the luxury of quiet or stillness. But now, in this place, she began to understand that it could feel safe, even if it was unfamiliar. As the weeks passed, her confidence on the ranch grew. She learned to feed the cattle, care for the horses, and even mend fences on her own. The rancher offered guidance when necessary, but he allowed her to work at her own pace. It was the first time in her life she had been trusted to do something without constant supervision. And she began to trust herself again. One evening, after a long day of work, she sat near the fire, peeling vegetables for the evening stew. The rancher had gone outside to check the barn, leaving her in the quiet kitchen. For the first time, she allowed herself to relax fully. She realized she had not felt safe for a long time, not truly safe. Here, in this small, simple house, she could breathe without fear of attack, without fear of judgment, without fear of being forced to leave. Her thoughts drifted back to her journey, the cold nights she had survived, the hunger, the fear. She realized how much she had carried alone, how heavy it had been. And now, sitting by the warm fire, she understood that she did not have to carry everything alone anymore. The rancher had shown her that someone could care, not for what she could give, but simply because she deserved it. The rancher returned, carrying a stack of firewood. "You're getting better at that," he said, noticing her careful work with the vegetables. I think I am," she replied quietly, not used to compliment but appreciating it nonetheless. He sat beside her, placing the wood near the fire. "It's not just about the work," he said. "It's about believing in yourself. You can't do everything perfectly, but if you keep trying, you'll find that you're capable of more than you think." She nodded slowly, considering his words. They felt strange but comforting. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Most people had expected her to fail or punished her for trying. But here, there was only support. That night, as she lay near the fire, she thought about the life she had been forced to leave behind. She had fled from danger, from abuse, and from a world that had never allowed her to feel safe. And yet, she realized that the lessons she had learned, about survival, resilience, and caution, were still part of her. She would not forget them, but perhaps now she could carry them differently, with a sense of hope instead of constant fear. The next morning brought another snowstorm, though milder than the first. The girl watched it fall from the window, the soft flakes drifting lazily through the air. The rancher had prepared the animals, so there was little for them to do outside, but she insisted on helping him move the smaller animals to the barn. Together they worked quietly, the cold pressing against their faces, the wind tugging at their clothes. During a brief pause, the girl looked up at him. Why do you care so much?" she asked. He paused, considering the question. "Because someone once cared for me when I needed it, and I never forgot. It wasn't about what I could give them, just about being there. That's how people should treat each other. No strings, no expectations, just help when it's needed." She thought about that, realizing how rare it was in her life. People had always expected something in return from her, loyalty, work, or compliance. But here, for the first time, she was allowed to simply be, and that was enough. The storm continued into the afternoon, keeping them inside for the most part. They spent the time repairing tools and preparing food, working side by side in comfortable silence. Occasionally, she would ask questions about ranch life or the animals, and he would answer patiently. Slowly, a rhythm developed between them, a silent understanding that neither forced conversation nor rushed trust. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, the rancher handed her a small cup of tea. "Here," he said softly, "warm yourself. You've done enough for today." She accepted it, holding the cup carefully. The warmth spread through her hands, reaching her heart as well. She realized that she had not only found physical safety, but also a place where her presence mattered, where she was respected and seen. It was a foreign feeling, but not an unwelcome one. Over the next few days, the girl began to share small stories from her past, about the people she had known, the places she had been, and the skills she had learned to survive. She spoke cautiously, leaving out the painful details, but each story revealed her strength and resourcefulness. The rancher listened without interruption, nodding, asking gentle questions when appropriate. It was clear to him that she had endured more than most, yet she still had the courage to keep moving forward. One evening, as they watched the fire crackle in the hearth, the girl finally spoke words she had not said in a long time. I think I can stay here for now. If that's all right." The rancher smiled, a quiet relief in his expression. "Of course, you're welcome. You don't have to leave until you're ready. This is your place as long as you need it." For the first time, she felt a sense of peace that she had never experienced before. It was not complete, not permanent, but it was enough to allow her to breathe, to rest, and to start imagining a future where she was not constantly running. As the night deepened and the stars appeared above the snowy hills, the girl sat near the fire, sipping her tea and watching the flickering flames. She realized that she had survived storms far harsher than snow, and yet here, in the quiet presence of someone who had chosen to care for her, she could finally feel the beginnings of healing. And though neither the rancher nor the girl knew what the coming days would bring, both understood that their lives had shifted in subtle, profound ways. Trust had begun to form, courage had begun to return, and the first seeds of hope had been planted. And sometimes, that was all it took to change everything. The days were growing longer now, and the chill of winter had begun to soften into the pale warmth of early spring. The ranch was alive with small signs of renewal. Grass peeked through the melting snow, the horses shook their coats as if to shake off the memory of frost, and the birds had returned to sing in the trees. The girl moved through it all quietly, but with a growing sense of belonging. Each day, the rancher watched her with a mix of pride and relief. She was no longer merely surviving, she was beginning to live. She had learned the daily rhythm of the ranch, the feeding, the cleaning, the tending of animals, and she did so with a careful precision that impressed the rancher. More importantly, she had begun to take initiative. Where before she had waited for instructions, Now, she noticed tasks that needed doing, quietly attending to them without being asked. It was a small thing, but it spoke volumes about the changes happening within her. She was learning to trust herself, to believe that she could manage, and to accept the safety she had been given. One morning, while they were working in the barn, she paused and looked at him. "Do you ever get scared? Out here alone?" she asked, her voice quiet and thoughtful. He glanced at her, considering the question. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Even when you think you're prepared, life can surprise you, but fear isn't something to fight all the time. It's something to respect. It reminds you that you're alive, that you need to be careful. But it doesn't have to control you," she nodded slowly. "I've been scared a lot," she said, almost whispering. "Most of my life, actually. I thought it would always be that way." "You're not alone anymore," he said gently. "You don't have to face everything on your own, and you don't have to be afraid to accept help." She looked at him, unsure how to respond. She had lived her life believing that asking for help was dangerous, that people would take advantage of her, or that she would owe them something she could never repay. Yet here on this ranch, she was learning that help could exist without strings, and that safety could be offered without expectation. The afternoon was spent outside, checking fences and preparing feed for the animals. She moved with a quiet efficiency, carrying buckets and bags without complaint. Occasionally, she paused to watch the horses, running her hands along their sleek coats and whispering soft words to them. The rancher noticed how gentle she was, how naturally she seemed to connect with the animals, and he realized that her life experiences, as difficult as they had given her a unique strength and sensitivity. As they worked, a distant sound reached their ears, the faint rumble of a truck along the road that ran near the edge of the ranch. The girl tensed immediately, her eyes scanning the horizon. "Who is that?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. "Probably just a neighbor," the rancher replied, though he too felt a slight unease. It had been months since anyone from the outside world had visited, and he knew how quickly outsiders could disrupt the quiet life of the ranch. He glanced at her and noticed the subtle way she shifted closer to him, as if seeking a shield from the unknown. He understood. The world beyond these fences had been unkind to her, and the simplest sound of another person could bring back memories she didn't wish to relive. When the truck passed without stopping, she relaxed slightly, but the tension lingered in her shoulders. The rancher placed a firm but gentle hand on her arm. "You're safe here," he reminded her. "No one can hurt you as long as you're here." She nodded, absorbing his words but not yet fully believing them. She wanted to desperately, but years of hardship had taught her caution. Still, the rancher's steady presence, his consistent care, and the quiet stability of the ranch were slowly eroding her fears. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, the girl hesitated before speaking. I've never had someone just protect me, without asking for anything, without wanting something in return." The rancher paused, placing a ladle of stew onto her plate. "People like to give and take, that's true. But sometimes it's enough to just be there for someone, to help them when they need it, no questions asked. That's all I ask of you, to be yourself, to live your life, and to trust that it's okay to accept help." She looked down at her plate, her fingers tracing the rim. She had spent so long expecting demands, expecting judgment, expecting danger. But here, for the first time, she realized that there could be a place where she was seen for who she was, not for what she could give or do. The nights continued in this rhythm, work during the day, warmth by the fire at night, quiet conversations that slowly built trust. The girl began to share more of herself, small stories of her childhood, the people she had known, and the lessons she had learned while surviving on her own. Each story revealed a remarkable resilience, a cleverness, and a strength that had been honed by necessity. And each story deepened the rancher's respect for her, not pity, but genuine admiration for someone who had endured so much and yet retained the spark of life. One afternoon, A sudden storm approached. Dark clouds rolled over the hills, and the wind picked up, carrying the sharp scent of rain and melting snow. The rancher quickly moved the animals into the barn, and the girl followed, her movements fast but careful. Together they worked to secure doors and gates, the wind whipping around them, and the first drops of rain began to fall. When the barn was finally secure, they stood together, catching their breath, soaked to the skin but unharmed. The girl looked at him, eyes wide. I've never worked with someone like this," she admitted. "Someone who doesn't yell, doesn't criticize, just helps." The rancher smiled, brushing rain from his hair. "It's called working together. It's called trust. You give it and you get it back. That's all there is to it." As the storm passed and the sun returned, the girl felt a quiet satisfaction. For the first time in her life, she had experienced partnership, someone who treated her as an equal, who allowed her to contribute, who offered protection without demanding control. It was a foreign feeling, but not an uncomfortable one. It was empowering. The next days brought more lessons and challenges. She learned to care for the newborn calves, to help with the chores that required patience and careful attention, and to anticipate problems before they arose. The rancher guided her when necessary but allowed her to make decisions on her own. Each time she succeeded, her confidence grew. Each time she faltered, he corrected gently, without judgment. One evening, after a particularly long day, they sat on the porch, the sky painted with streaks of pink and gold. The girl held a cup of warm tea, and the rancher sat beside her, quiet but present. For a long moment they simply watched the horizon, listening to the soft rustle of the wind and the distant calls of animals settling for the night. I think I'm starting to understand," she said finally. "Why you let me stay, why you care. It's different from anything I've ever known." He looked at her, his expression gentle. "It's simple. Everyone deserves a chance. Everyone deserves safety and respect. You came here and you showed that you were willing to try, willing to learn, willing to trust. That's enough." Her lips curved into a small, tentative smile. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope. Not a guarantee of a perfect life, but the simple hope that someone could see her as she was, without judgment or expectation. It was a fragile feeling, but it felt real. Over the next week, she began to participate more actively in ranch life. She helped plan tasks, suggested ways to improve feeding routines, and even assisted the rancher in minor repairs around the house and barn. She was no longer just a guest, she was a contributor, and in this small, practical way she began to rebuild her sense of self-worth. One afternoon, as they repaired a fence together, she paused to look at him. I never thought someone could let me in like this. Just let me be part of something without expecting anything. That's what people should do," he replied quietly. "We all need a place where we belong, and sometimes that place comes from someone willing to care without conditions." She nodded, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun or fire. It was a quiet, steady warmth, the kind that comes from knowing that someone sees you, values you, and accepts you as you are. For the first time, she began to imagine a future where she did not have to run, where she could grow, learn, and heal. And though challenges would come, storms, hard work, and moments of fear, she now knew she had a place where she could face them with strength, guided by trust and compassion. She had found more than shelter. She had found a space to rebuild herself, piece by piece, alongside someone who had chosen to see her for who she truly was. Spring had settled fully over the ranch now. The days were warmer, the snow had completely melted, and life was returning to the land with quiet determination. The girl moved through the ranch with confidence, no longer the cautious, shivering stranger who had arrived in the middle of a storm. Her steps were steadier, her hands sure, and her eyes brightened with curiosity and purpose. She had begun to feel at home, though she still carried the memory of hardship deep inside her, a memory that reminded her of how far she had come. The rancher watched her as she tended to the animals, noticing the subtle changes in her demeanor. She laughed more freely now, spoke more openly, and took initiative in tasks without waiting for instruction. He felt a quiet pride but also a deep respect for the resilience she carried. She had survived a harsh life alone, and yet here she was, choosing to stay, choosing to trust, choosing to live fully for the first time. One morning, they walked together along the edge of the pasture, checking the fences and watching the horses graze. The girl paused to pick up a fallen branch, examining it thoughtfully before dropping it into the firewood pile. "I never thought I could do all this," she said quietly. "I mean, take care of animals, work on a place like this. I thought I'd always be running, always surviving." "You've learned quickly," the rancher said. "But more than that, you've learned to trust yourself." "That's what matters," she nodded, staring at the ground for a moment. I think I'm starting to understand what it means to belong somewhere, to not always be afraid." "That's the first step," he replied. "Belonging doesn't mean everything is easy. It means you have a place to grow, to be seen, and to find your strength without fear." Her eyes lifted to his, and for the first time she felt that she could really believe him. The storm she had fled from, the cold nights, the constant fear, they were behind her now. She had survived them, and now she had the chance to build something new. The days passed, each filled with quiet work, small conversations, and moments of reflection. She helped the rancher with tasks she had once thought impossible, fixing fences, caring for sick animals, and even guiding the younger horses through gentle training exercises. Each success brought a quiet sense of accomplishment, a reminder that she was capable, not just surviving but thriving. One afternoon, while collecting eggs from the chicken coop, she hesitated at the gate and looked up at the hills in the distance. "Do you ever get lonely for people?" she asked softly. The rancher smiled, considering her question. "Sometimes," he said, "but loneliness isn't always bad. It gives you a chance to understand yourself, and it makes the moments with others more meaningful." She nodded, thinking about her life before the ranch. She had been surrounded by people, yet she had always felt alone because she couldn't trust them. Now, for the first time, she understood that being with someone didn't have to mean fear or obligation. It could mean safety, respect, and quiet companionship. That evening, as the sun began to dip behind the distant hills, they sat together near the fire outside. The girl wrapped herself in a blanket, holding a cup of warm tea, and watched the orange glow of the sunset. The rancher joined her, placing a small log in the fire and sitting quietly beside her. "You've changed," he said softly, "not just in what you do, but in who you are. You've learned to trust, to work, to hope. And you've shown strength that few people ever need to show in a lifetime." She smiled, a little shyly. I didn't know I could. I thought all I had was survival, but now I feel like I have something more, a chance to be me without fear." "That's what life can give you," he said. "Not just survival, but the chance to grow, to heal, and to be yourself." The girl thought about that, reflecting on all the moments that had brought her here. The stormy night when she had collapsed at the fence, the warmth of the fire, the quiet patience of the rancher, the slow learning of ranch life, and the small victories that had rebuilt her confidence. Each step had been difficult, but each had also carried the promise of something better, a life not dictated by fear, but shaped by her choices. Over the following days, she became more integrated into the ranch. She helped the rancher plan tasks for the coming weeks, learning to anticipate problems before they arose. She developed a quiet connection with the animals, each one responding to her gentle touch and patient care. And she began to find joy in simple things. The way the morning sun glinted off the horses' coats, the sound of chickens clucking in the coop, the smell of fresh bread baking in the kitchen. One afternoon, while repairing a fence, she paused and looked up at the rancher. "I never thought I'd feel normal," she said, her voice soft. "Not in a long time. I thought life would always be hard and lonely. But here I feel safe. I feel like I belong. That's all I've ever wanted for you, he replied. Safety, trust, and a place to grow. You've earned it not because of what you've done, but because you are who you are. She nodded, letting the words sink in. It was a strange and beautiful feeling to be valued simply for existing, for being herself. She had carried so much fear and doubt for so long, and now, for the first time, she could breathe without tension, move without hesitation, and dream without limits. As spring deepened, the ranch began to feel fuller, warmer, more alive. The girl's laughter could be heard as she helped the animals, and her confidence showed in the way she approached each task. The rancher noticed the change not just in her, but in himself as well. He had offered shelter, protection, and trust, but he had also received something in return: the joy of seeing someone grow, heal, and embrace life again. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat by the fire inside, the room glowing with warmth. The girl poured tea for both of them and handed him a cup. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything, for letting me stay, for showing me that I can trust someone and that life can be better than I thought." He smiled, a quiet satisfaction in his eyes. "You've done all the hard work. I only helped when I could. You found your strength and you chose to stay. That's what matters." She looked down at her cup, feeling the warmth of the tea spread through her hands and her chest. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope for a future beyond mere survival, a future where she could continue to grow, to learn, and to be part of something steady and safe. Over the next few days, she continued to take on more responsibility at the ranch. She fed the animals, cleaned the barn, repaired fences, and helped prepare meals. She began to anticipate problems, suggest solutions, and even teach the younger children of visiting neighbors how to care for animals. She was no longer the fragile girl who had arrived in the snowstorm. She was strong, capable, and confident, her past hardships transformed into quiet wisdom and resilience. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, the girl and the rancher sat outside once more. She sipped her tea and watched the hills stretch into the distance. I finally understand what it means to have a home," she said softly. "Not just a place to sleep, but a place to grow, to be safe, and to feel like I matter." "That's exactly it," the rancher said. "A home isn't just walls and a roof. It's the people, the trust, the support. You found that here, and I hope you'll continue to hold on to it, no matter where life takes you." She smiled, a full, unguarded smile, the kind that reached her eyes. It was a smile that carried the weight of her journey, the struggles she had endured, and the hope she now allowed herself to feel. For the first time in a long time, she believed that she could face the future with courage, and that the world could be a place where trust and kindness were possible. And as night fell over the ranch, the stars emerging in the clear sky above, she sat near the fire, feeling the warmth of both the flames and the life she had begun to build. She was no longer merely surviving. She was living, learning, and thriving. The rancher, sitting beside her, watched with quiet satisfaction, knowing that sometimes the most meaningful change comes from patience, trust, and the simple act of offering someone a safe place to grow. In that moment, the girl understood something she had never allowed herself to believe: that even after a life of hardship, danger, and fear, it was possible to find safety, acceptance, and hope. And she knew, without a doubt, that this ranch, this quiet life, and the man who had welcomed her when she had nothing to offer would always be a part of her journey, a reminder that courage, resilience, and kindness could transform even the coldest, loneliest nights into warmth, hope, and belonging.